This year for Vampire Month, we decided to go for something a little old school, something a little different, and something that influenced a lot of writers. We're taking you way, way back. Okay, not that far back, to 1975 when Stephen King first wrote Salem's Lot.
Neither of us have read a lot of Stephen King. I've read a couple of books, and this was Chelsey's first. So we're coming into his second novel with fresh eyes.
And it turns out there's a lot to love about this old classic, and we were both surprised at how much it held up.
Stephen King admits that Salem's Lot is pretty topical to the time that he was writing it. It paints a detailed picture of 1975, capturing the sentiment, the atmosphere, and the zeitgeist. It's like a time capsule with vampires tossed in for good measure.
I keep encountering phrases and expressions that I had never quite encountered or thought about before, and some of the things were just things that fell out of fashion, like, what the fuck is a soda fountain, and how does one sit at it?
And some of them were more like, now that is a colorful expression that needs to be brought back.
Reading this book, I came to the realization that I have read almost nothing that was published before I was born. I mean, sure, I've read Shakespeare and Jane Austen and a bunch of the rest of the classics, and I'm not, like, bragging, that's not what I mean, but almost nothing of what I've read has come from the period between the 1950s to the 1990s, and it was a strange, strange world back then.
Salem's Lot takes place in where else other than Maine, following writer Ben Mears and his company as they come under assault from an ancient vampire freshly imported from the dark reaches of Europe and coming in with a hot game plan.
Our main character Ben used to live in Salem's Lot as a kid, but he's returned to write his next novel about the haunted, spooky house that gave him a massive fright and possibly a supernatural encounter as a kid.
But our second biggest character is the lot itself. It's this sleepy little place that has its full share of heartbreak, dashed hopes and dreams and entropy and everyday banal evils. We get a glimpse at all of the lives of the characters who live in this town and who may or may not survive the vampire's attack.
It's a very slow and methodical attack too, that once it starts begins a chain like dominoes that is almost impossible to stop. In a town where almost nothing happens, it's very difficult to convince people that there is a vampire on the loose and they should not trust their friends and relatives.
Another non-character character is the Marston house. It sits on a hill overlooking Salem's Lot and is the site of a murder-suicide of an evil man and his wife who were possibly child murderers and Satan worshippers. It was never quite clear what they were up to in that house, but they both died violently many, many years ago. They may also have invited the vampire to Salem's Lot.
But their house is a specter that haunts the town, a symbol of evil that, like, when has been ignored, festers until it explodes and just infects everything around it. And it's in the Marston house where we encounter Kurt Barlow, our master vampire who has chosen to live there with his servant Straker, a cold, bald, competent man.
Ben Mears slowly realizes that he and the town are in danger from a dark force, and he gathers together a crew of people who believe him and are determined to help stop the evil encroaching on the town.
That includes his new girlfriend Susan, an old school teacher named Matt, Jimmy the doctor, Father Callahan, a priest who's looking to fight capital E evil, and Mark, a precocious young boy.
But as smart as Ben's motley crew is, Barlow is smarter, and he had a head start.
Vampires in this story function very much like classic vampires. They can't come in unless they're invited, and they're subject to sunlight, garlic, crosses, communion wafers, as well as a lot of other folk protections. But despite all their weaknesses, they are massively powerful. They can compel people, and they are darkly seductive.
All of the characters of Salem's Lot are well fleshed out and have their own morals, hang-ups, and motivations for what they do, and they're enjoyable to watch and root for.
Susan in particular was interesting because she was the only main female character. She's independent and has her own hopes and dreams before she meets Ben, but I get the sense that she might leave all that behind to follow the domestic path if she had the chance.
She managed to walk a wobbly line between being a bit cliche and not. Sometimes she's on one side, sometimes she's on the other, but she's impossible to dislike. Women in this novel, as a whole, are often put on the Madonna-whore dichotomy in a way that makes my skin crawl. All the men are very much in tune with who's had sex, is having sex, who they could have sex with, who they're attracted to, and what their dick is doing. Women are viewed as either being bangable or ripe to be banged. I can't tell if this was on purpose, if it was a product of the time, or if it's something that comes out from an author without them knowing.
Susan doesn't quite subscribe to these views. Whereas her parents were raised in the 40s and 50s, she is a child of the late 60s and isn't thrilled with the constraints that her parents want to put on their adult daughter about having sex and settling down, but she isn't quite ready to throw all those constraints out either, or do more than just go about her own direction fairly quietly.
You can see a lot of themes and tropes in this book that Stephen King will carry on to explore in his later books. For example, that evil leaves a mark on a place that it takes place in, The Shining. Smaller banal evils are a gateway to larger evil, the idyllic American way allowing for evil to flourish, and the writer as a character.
Even just being familiar with some of Stephen King's movies, it's interesting to see how many times he can repeat these themes with different variations to different ends. It's fascinating.
I would highly recommend reading Salem's Lot if you're into vampire fiction.
There is a reason Stephen King has stuck around for so many years, and that's because when it comes right down to it, he's a great writer. And it's interesting when he applies his talents to writing the traditional vampire.
He just has this way of creating a creeping menace, and then adding such character to essentially inanimate objects like towns, the fall, darkness. It's really good.
As vampires go, I think Kurt Barlow is one of the most dangerous and the most cunning. I don't think we've encountered a vampire that has done so much planning for his domination so many years in advance before. But when you think about it, it makes sense. What is time to an immortal incarnate of evil?
Facing down Barlow takes a lot out of our heroes and comes with some sacrifices that have to be made. And you know me, I love me some consequences.
So if you're in the mood for something a little different and want to be transported right back to the middle of the 70s, Salem's Lot is the book for you.
It's creepy, it's poignant, it borrows just enough from Bram Stoker's Dracula. It spawned maybe a dozen copycats. It's great, and it feels good to be back to those traditional vampire masterminds who are vulnerable to sunlight and crosses.
Hey guys, thank you for watching our video, and if you liked the video, subscribe and check out our spoiler review to find out exactly what happens in Salem's Lot. Bye guys.